Good morning. It's 11:30 in the UK, so we're going to make a start with session 2C, which is entitled Infrastructure Development. But we do have three rather different papers, although there are some very interesting synergies which we can explore also. And the three presenters are Lynn Vosman. We also, I hope, have Jiale, who's going to join us, and Hasni. They have been made presenters now. My name is Paul Chan from Delft University of Technology. And also with me is my co-moderator, Alex Opoku from UCL. We have three presentations which we will play, and after each presentation, we will open up to Q&A. And then if we have time later on, we can also have a discussion right at the end. The wonderful thing about being online is that the presentations are all within 10 minutes. And we also have a bit of slack because the second presentation is also a bit shorter. So without further ado, I'm just going to play to you Lynn's presentation, exploring the innovation ecosystem concept.
Everyone, and thank you for joining this presentation and the interest in our paper. So my name is Lynn Vosman, and together with Coenen, Leentje, Volker, and Klaasjan Visscher, we wrote a paper that's called Exploring the Innovation Ecosystem Concept for a Construction Industry in Transition. So with this paper, we aim to explore the applicability of the innovation ecosystem concept in construction. And we want to explore this because we are facing some major societal challenges in construction, and these require collaborations and innovations that exceed the single project level. But the project-based structure of the construction industry impedes this, for example, in the diffusion of knowledge and in the spread of innovations. And therefore, there is a need for a more comprehensive perspective on how is dealt with collaboration and innovation on an industry level. So we explored whether the innovation ecosystem concept can be of use in improving the conditions for the required innovation and change by analyzing two unique cases. So I will proceed with a brief introduction in the innovation ecosystem concept. This concept is used to describe organizational systems, and it deals with an overarching multi-actor view on innovation. So based on a literature review, we distinguished four innovation ecosystem characteristics. And the first one here is that the innovation ecosystem involves a heterogeneous set of actors. This can even extend to cross-industry networks. And the second characteristic is the strategic alignment of actors. So ecosystems are characterized by co-opetition, and this creates inescapable interdependencies between the actors involved. The third characteristic is the alignment of actors towards a shared value proposition. And the fourth characteristic is the non-formal governance with non-contractual and dynamic relationships. So about the approach to explore the applicability of the innovation ecosystem, two cases were studied. And in the next slides, I will elaborate on the cases. The data was obtained by desk research, by attending network events, and by conducting semi-structured interviews. Hereafter, the cases were systematically analyzed using the four characteristics, so actor heterogeneity, strategic alignment of actors, alignment towards a value proposition, and non-formal governance, to identify the ecosystem elements that were present in the cases. And we thought for the elements that were unique for the construction industry and that were explainable as a consequence of the innovation ecosystem concept in construction, which finally resulted in the potential consequences of the innovation ecosystem concept. So the first case that we studied was the case of the Water Board of Limburg, and this is the executive organization for two Dutch water boards, and I call it WBL in short. They introduced framework contracts to procure collaboration for 4 to 6 years. And what they did at VBL was they divided their whole asset portfolio into 5 parcels. And for each parcel, 3 contractors were contracted in a framework agreement. So next to the parcels, a so-called shopping mall was set up. And this shopping mall consisted of technical solutions which were provided by different suppliers. And VBL had access to these solutions through the contractors and subcontractors in the framework agreement. So also in this case, an independent process coach was involved to support the collaboration within the parcels. So the second case that we studied was the case of Chaplin, and Chaplin stands for the collaboration in asphalt applications with lignin, and it represents a platform which is centered around the collective aim to develop bio-based asphalt. And this network consisted of 22 different organizations, like knowledge institutes, contractors, government, and suppliers. And it was not limited to the construction sector only, but also organizations from other sectors were involved. So I move on to the results. We analyzed the cases using the 4 ecosystem characteristics. So looking at the first characteristic, actor heterogeneity, we found that in the VBL case, the involved actors were comparable to regular construction projects. But the actors were involved through the whole construction process. And also for VBL, the possibility existed to access the specific suppliers or other actors outside the framework. And in the Chaplin case, organizations were able to join this network on their own account. And this enabled them to act in different roles, and it resulted in cross-industry collaborations. So looking at the second characteristic, the strategic alignment of actors, we found a high level of actor interdependence in both cases. So the actors were dependent on the outputs of other actors in the development, but also in the optimization of the product or the process. So in the VBL case, the interdependency was pre-mediated, and it was contractually arranged with agreements, for example, on knowledge sharing. While in the Chaplin case, the interdependency emerged as a result of the joint development of bio-based asphalt. So looking at the third characteristic, alignment with respect to the value proposition, we found that in the VBL case, a common purpose was found in a cost-benefit structure. So in the contracts between the client and the contractor, those were collaboration-driven, profits and risks were fairly shared. So this way it was in everyone's interest to deliver a good end product for the lowest cost possible. And for the Chaplin case, the value proposition was quite prominent, being the development of bio-based asphalt. And this output was clearly predefined, and it was beneficial to pursue it for all the actors in the network. So the last characteristic is that of the non-formal governance. And here we found that in the VBL case, there were formal contracts between the client and the contractor. But within the boundaries of this framework agreement, the formality was quite low and the collaboration was trust-based. And in the Chaplin case, the platform structure allowed the participants to join and leave on their own accounts. So they could contribute to specific parts on specific moments. So concluding, the results indicate that the innovation ecosystem perspective has the potential to improve the conditions for project transcending collaboration and innovation, which is required to contribute to societal challenges. And it was found that several underlying principles of this concept can already be found. And in particular, these are the alignment of incentives towards a common goal, co-opetition, and complementarity of the various actors involved. So for the innovation ecosystem concept to reach its full potential in construction, still several issues remain. For example, these are that traditional procurement practices leave little room for a dynamic network, and for external organizations to offer their solutions after the tenant took place. Also, an ecosystem approach requires new business models which are not based on profit and risk margins. And in addition, the long-term impact of an ecosystem approach on the organizations, both within as outside the network, is unclear. But overall, the ecosystem perspective offers a novel view on actor relationships in construction, and it has the potential to contribute to societal challenges. But future research is needed to explore this concept in a construction context. So we are looking forward to hear your thoughts in the discussion afterwards. And also, if you have any other questions after the discussion, you can always contact us. And for now, thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lynn, for that very crisp presentation. It's also a very nice concept that ties in very well with Chris Goss's sort of opening keynote, where he also got us to think about the ecosystem. I see quite a number of people typing now, and I see John raise a question. Maybe let's start with that question. John asks if any of the results surprise you, and which ones, if that is the case. Do you want to respond to that, Lynn?
Yes, of course. Thank you, John, for this question. Did any of the outcomes surprise as well? It's good to know that both of the cases were not initiated as an ecosystem. But we did see a lot of ecosystem elements come back into the construction sector. So I found that a very, well, not really surprising, but very interesting finding, because it shows that there are already attempts made in our industry that, well, go a little bit beyond an ecosystem approach.
Okay, and a related question, I guess. Pernilla also asked, this idea of the ecosystem, is it a very different concept, let's say, from partnering? And as I was also kind of thinking, that for a number of years, we've also been very interested in examining it as networks. So rather than to talk about industry, we talk about networks. So do the words matter? What do you think, Lynn?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's also one that we also, well, struggle a bit with. I think when you look at the ecosystem approach, it is very broad, and it is broader than than considering only the network, because the ecosystem, it considers the whole network of actors involved, also from other industries, and it is centered around a central value proposition. I think there are a lot of similarities with the network approach, but it also adds some elements that are different from the network approach. But it is, I think, an interesting point for further research to look into.
Okay, I see actually quite a number. Lisette and Leon also, I think you can see on the chat.
Yeah.
So is there a limit to its success when you talk about numbers of participants? And Leon also have a question around the case selection. Do you want to respond to those?
Yes, so first the question of Lisette. I was wondering about the scope of an ecosystem. When you speak of an ecosystem and you talk about number of participants, and is there a limit for its success?
I think that ties in also with Quadwell's question on the boundaries of the ecosystem. So how do you scope it?
I think it's when you look at an ecosystem, like when you look into the theory, it is defined as a dynamic network. So that means that actors enter the network, but also that actors leave the network. So in that sense, the number of participants differs, and it depends on the things that they can add to the central value proposition at that certain moment in time. So it is centered around the value proposition. And in order to achieve it, sometimes you need a little bit more from one actor, sometimes a little bit more from the other actor. So is there a limit to the number of actors? I think there is, but we did not look into that. Probably there is. But the network is a dynamic system. So I hope that answers the question of Lisette. And I also see the question of Lynn.
So Leon is about the case selection, because case 1 is more like a sort of estate development.
Yeah.
Whereas 2 is more product development.
Yeah, that's true. Case selection, we selected these cases because we already, they took a novel approach to collaboration in the construction sector. So they did look beyond the single project level. And that was a qualification that we took to select these cases. But indeed, they have a very different, I think you can see it as a very different value proposition, because in one case, they really intended to develop the bio-based asphalt. And in the other case, I think it was also more or less like a process innovation. So we took these cases because they looked at collaboration at a very different way as that we are used to in the construction sector. But I think when you look further into this, or when you look at other cases also, you may find some similarities at the one approach or at the other approach.
Yeah, indeed. And I was also struck that both were operating in the infrastructure sector, but of course within that you also have, maybe it's a nested case study sort of. Aquato has a follow-up question about the actors entering and leaving, and also the dynamics of that heterogeneity. Do you have something to maybe say about that? Maybe he's suggesting that maybe looking at the Scott perspective, the social construction of technology might be quite useful.
Let's see, you mean the question, given that actors enter and leave the network?
That's right.
And, the dynamic heterogeneity of the ecosystem studied, could the social construction of technology lands offer another angel for investigating the innovation ecosystem? I don't know.
Well, maybe you can't answer that question based on this study, but perhaps the question is, where next? What are you thinking of doing? I see Tom also sharing his thoughts on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Something that differentiates an ecosystem with networks is the focus of shared value proposition rather than the network itself. I have maybe a question around the platforms, because in the first case, VBL, you have this shopping mall. I thought that was very interesting. And then you use the word platform in the sort of Chaplin case. And of course, platforms are maybe, do you see the platforms as coordinating those shared value propositions? Because of course, we are also in a platform society nowadays.
I think, I'm not sure how you mean, like how do you mean your question? Like if you see the platform as coordinating?
So I think tied to the question on the dynamic heterogeneity, we have so many different actors coming and going, and maybe we would have platforms like the Google or the Ubers of this world where they kind of coordinate. Do you see that perhaps maybe as becoming quite important in an ecosystem?
Well, I think it is. It is already also a well-studied element in literature, like the platform ecosystem. I think it is a very interesting viewpoint. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if we have some more time, maybe we can continue this conversation at the end of this session. But for now, can I ask everyone to just thank Lynn in the usual manner? Thank you very much. And I see your co-authors are also here as well.
Thank you.
Great. I'm just going, before I move on to the next presenter, can I just check if Jiale is in the room or Laura? I see an Inshu, but I'm not sure whether that is one of the authors. Is Jiale in the room? You can put on the chat, or Laura. Okay. Well, if they are not in the room, I would suggest that we would still play the presentation, and then we may maybe collect the questions and comments. Maybe they'll join us later on, so that we can also send to them. But very much thank you to indeed to Lynn Vosman from Twente. Okay. We'll move on to the next presentation now, and that is by Jiale, Lee, and Laura Florez-Perez, and that's on the impact of property tax on housing price. This is also about second homes in China, which I think is something that we need to think about.
Hi there. So this is the presentation for our study. It is titled Impact of Property Tax on Housing Price, an Analysis for Real Estate Sustainable Development and Renewal by Jiale Lee, which is my co-author, and myself, Laura Florez-Perez. We're right to the Barber School of Sustainable Construction at University College Lynn. The concepts of this presentation are we're going to do a general view of housing market and a research question. And I'm going to go over the literature on the methodology, explain a bit about fiscal policy versus monetary policy, and neoclassical economic theory, and the difference in business model. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some discussion and conclusions. So this is a general view of the housing markets around the world. And as you see on the left-hand side, the most expensive residential property markets are based in Hong Kong, and then followed by Nice, Singapore, and then finally Paris and New York. And as we see there's a few Chinese cities such as Shanghai and Shenzhen which have a very high property market. And then when we see in China, some Chinese cities on the figure on the right, you can see that Shanghai is the most expensive one, followed by Beijing, and then finally Nanjing. These are all in thousands of US dollars. So based on this, we established a research question: how does the property tax levy in Shanghai and Chongqing will affect the housing prices? Because China has some tax levy for different cities, and we wanted to figure out how these tax levy could affect the housing prices. The housing prices of many Chinese cities have reached luxury standards of property purchase. They're very expensive. And due to COVID, this could be a great chance for the Chinese government to control the overheated markets. So it's a good time to see whether they can lower the housing price markets in China. The levy of property tax in Shanghai and Chongqing in 2011 is expected to act on the restraint of housing markets. So I'm going to go over some literature and methodology. So the first topic is, as I said before, fiscal policy versus monetary policy. So the fiscal policy and monetary policy are macroeconomic tools, and I usually work together to manage continual ideas. Taxation, is one of the most widely used methods for fiscal policy, and the property tax can increase purchasing costs of buying a house and thus restrain consumers' ability to pay. The second thing is the neoclassical economic theory. Keynes established that in 1936, and he proposed that the demand and supply are regarded as the decisive factors of price and the driving forces. This study assumes, in a short time, that the supply for houses is consistent, that the demand for houses or people's willingness to buy a house is essential for housing prices. And then finally, the difference in business model is one of the most commonly used tools in economics in recent years to evaluate the effect of public policy or public intervention. This model combines free and close difference and with or without difference to control the influence of some other factors, such as inflation. So based on these methods, we establish a difference in difference model to see how the price will be influenced, looking at different variables, such as the asset, the size, the year, and the region. And we also use another dummy variable of the region. And as you see there, the equation of the price to establish that envelope. Then using the data from these two cities, and based on the results, we started with a property tax has not imposed any significant inventory effect on the residents' demand for house purchase as expected. So, the house price. This may be because the property tax reform has problems in either policy design or implementation. So the property tax is not actually taxing or inhibiting any of the market housing purchase. And the most important reason is that this measure is carried out in an extremely mild style compared with other developed countries, so that most investors will not be. Now you see there, we compare different cities, the property tax revenue in billion dollars in 2008, and that is a percentage of the government revenue. And Shanghai and Chongqing have respectively 3.35 billion dollars in 2018. Then compared to that as a percentage, Shanghai is 1.24% of the local revenue. Chongqing has a much higher, 4.2. As you see there, compared to America, South Korea and Japan is way much higher. America is 15, South Korea is 20, and the conclusion of the study is found that tax policies in Shanghai and Chongqing are relatively mild with low tax rates and narrow range of tax assessments. And the data of this study suggests that property tax does not play an important role in controlling housing prices and shows the influence in both cities. So this leaves plenty of room for the Chinese government to improve and develop new policies to control the overfield market. Basically, we're saying that the tax levy should be modified accordingly to be able to accommodate housing market. And in the post-COVID-19 era, the development and renewal of the real market is a problem that many countries are facing. Not only Chinese cities, but some other countries are facing. To some extent, the property tax contributes to decrease the relative purpose of housing buying and create healthier real estate. Improving the tax policy is needed for China as well as other countries that suffer from the turbulence of the real estate. Thank you very much. These are the reference, and you can find more details about the study in the paper.
Paul, I'm sorry, your microphone is muted, so we cannot hear you.
Ah. Yeah, that's right. That's a silly mistake. Yeah. I see a Laura in the room, and I'm not sure whether it's the same Laura. But I've made Laura the presenter. Can you just confirm if you were the presenter? Laura should be able to unmute yourself also.
Paul, this is a different Laura.
That's a different Laura? That's
my colleague.
That's your colleague. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure where she may be at the moment.
Yeah, and Jiale is not in the room. Okay, my proposal therefore is to maybe take any specific questions that people may have, or maybe also to share some experiences, because the paper and the presentation was about regulating the housing market, the property market, and of course trying to levy tax on second properties is also a hot topic, I think, in many countries, particularly with the challenge of the affordable housing crisis. I think the findings are quite interesting that actually sometimes the tax policies do not work as intended. And I'm just wondering if anyone has any comments for the authors, or maybe you would like to share some experiences. Certainly moving to the Netherlands myself, housing affordability is clearly a hot topic there too. Any thoughts or questions or comments? You can raise your hand or you can use the chat function. Are there any experiences where tax has made a difference? I see John typing. And I guess John, you are from Sweden. John, shall I make you a presenter and then you can just put your mic on? Saves you typing also. So John, I've made you a presenter also. So you should be able to put your mic on and we can see you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, and maybe your camera is also coming on.
Let's see.
Let's see.
Hi.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a far-fetched question, but I was just wondering, since we didn't have any kind of specific questions, I was wondering, do you see any possibilities of having a kind of scale in Texas to influence the possibility of more sustainable housing in your, have you noticed anything regarding that?
Okay.
I know it's a far-fetched question, but I couldn't, I started thinking about it. So, and since we're talking about taxes, so.
Yeah. Well, I'm of course not one of the authors or the researchers of this study, but I can imagine that we often think about taxes and financing to kind of nudge behavior. I don't know, in Sweden, do you have these taxes?
Yeah, we have sort of a straightforward tax system in that way, but we've started to make. I think Pernilla can help me and write something. It's climate declarations. We started doing that,
Okay.
so that's something we're starting to do now. And then, as we move along, we will start setting demands for it. But the main issue now is to start doing that actually. And then, of course, we have regulations and so on regarding housing and so on. But it might be that will lead to that kind of system, but no one knows for the moment, I think.
No, and I think the analysis that Laura and Jiale has done, I think is quite interesting because we can then start to see the impacts of these fiscal measures, perhaps. I know in the UK, for instance, when they had the pandemic, they introduced sort of stamp duty holidays, and that's actually inflated the prices.
Yeah,
it's artificially created that demand, demand for properties and sales. Yeah. So yeah, maybe we need to really start looking at the impacts of these reactive measures, I guess.
Yeah.
What about other countries? So we have some experiences about this climate declaration in Sweden. Are there any other? I'm sure housing crisis affects us all in all over the world. Hasni, what about Sri Lanka? Do we have any experiences there?
Yeah, there are some problems in housing here as well. So many developments are going on, and mainly some residential developments are going on in urban areas. So some researchers are also going here as well.
And what measures are the Sri Lankan government doing in terms of taxation?
Taxation, I'm not very sure about it, but currently some issues are identified because there are some problems in urban areas and some developers are required. So currently they are trying to develop and give some settlements to those residents.
Okay. Yeah. I think this would probably tie in very well with tomorrow's second keynote on trying to link up to the urban areas. I also particularly like the paper in trying to draw connections between what's going on in China and maybe in other countries as well, because global capital is, by its very nature, quite global. Any other thoughts from the participants in the room? Do we have any experiences, maybe from other countries? I also see Alex is still here. He's notionally in Johannesburg. Alex, do you have anything you want to add?
Hi, Paul. This is not an area that I'm very familiar with in terms of the economic impact of the housing. So I don't think I can add much value
Okay.
to the discussion.
Okay, in that case, we have, I see Farah typing. Farah, it might be easier if I just make you a presenter and then you can also just share with us your thoughts. You should be able to put your mic on now.
Hello everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Just some thoughts. I mean, I was doing a little bit of housing research at the beginning of the pandemic to see how pandemic affect their happiness. And one of the great thoughts that I found that it's different threats to different generations. So for those who after the retirement, they are much more in difficult situation because they already own few houses, but their children and their grandchildren are having the issue. So when we talk about affordability, it might be worth to look at different generation. And even the tax situation is not very helping because sometimes I think it's much the same in the UK as well, where the family trying to help their children, but the tax can be quite an issue. And you link back to the session tomorrow about the urban development because everybody's now trying to stay closer to the work. At the same time, the sandwich generation where they need to look after their parents. So tax, one thing, at the same time, different tax, which is the traveling tax, which also have impact towards houses.
Okay, I think those are really, really valid points to think about the life costs. We
Yes.
keep thinking that the old age pensioners are all well sorted nowadays, but of course they are also helping the sort of younger generation. I like the sandwich generation.
Yes.
If it's okay with you, what I will do is I will collect all these points and I'll send it to Laura and Jiale so that hopefully that could also help them. Well, thank you for the discussion. This also means that we have some time at the end to kind of have a rounder discussion of all three papers at the end. But we will sort of in absence thank both Laura and Jiale. And now we'll move on to the third paper in this session. And I think that's going to be presented by Hasni. And that's about blockchain technology adoption, particularly in facilities management in Sri Lanka.
Hello everyone, I'm Hasni Gunasekara from University of Moderator, Sri Lanka. My co-author is Dr. Pournima Sridarran. I'm happy to present our research at 37th ARCOM Research Conference. This is the presentation outline. First, I will start with the background. Advanced technologies can result efficient FM procurement operations, increasing productivity and reducing costs. When considering facilities management, procurement is essential to manage service providers for continual business operations. Due to rapid changes in competitive market, procurement process has become more complex and challenging. Therefore, answer is innovative processes. FM industry has identified the requirement of transforming to an advanced digitalized procurement system. Blockchain technology is identified as a solution for this. However, it is required to identify the challenges in the adoption of new technologies by evaluating their applicability. Research problem is identified under addressing industrial need and research gap. When we consider the industrial need, blockchain technology is still new to Sri Lanka and its adoption for FM procurement process is a big challenge. Thus, this gap is analyzed to identify the related barriers and solutions to overcome them. When considering the research gap, researchers have identified the common barriers for blockchain adoption and barriers specific for the supply chain management. This is the first research to analyze the gap by identifying barriers in blockchain technology adoption, which is beneficial for the future development of the FM procurement process. Aim of this research is to identify barriers in blockchain technology adoption for facilities management procurement process in Sri Lanka. There are three main objectives in this research. First objective is to explore the role of FM in procurement and current issues existing in the procurement process. Second objective is to explore the blockchain adoption for procurement with existing barriers. Finally, to analyze the barriers in blockchain adoption for facilities management procurement process with solutions to overcome them. Scope of this research is to identify adoption barriers in the Sri Lankan context. However, there was a limitation with the lack of IT experts who are proficient in blockchain technology in Sri Lanka. It was overcome by recruitment of experts who are involved in blockchain-based researches and blockchain-based industrial projects. This is the research methodology followed in the research study. First, a background study was done on FM procurement and blockchain technology adoption. Then, literature review was conducted. Qualitative approach was selected in order to identify current phenomena by assessing opinions. Expert survey was considered as the research strategy. Then, data was collected using semi-structured interviews. Each lasted 1.5 hours to explain their opinions freely. Thematic analysis was used to analyze the collected data, where themes were identified separately. This is the profile of experts. Inclusion criteria selected in this research are selection of normative experts from Sri Lanka who actually contribute to the development of blockchain-based solutions and who conduct research on blockchain adoption with at least 7 years experience in the field of expertise. Experts who do not meet the outcomes were excluded. All the experts were given an introduction on how the FM procurement process is performed before the interviews. Now I will move into research findings and analysis. Under Objective 1, role of FM in procurement is explored. Procurement is a crucial and complex process in FM for managing services and for interacting with different stakeholders. Therefore, FM procurement strategies should be properly planned. Procurement process is aimed at selecting the best bidder within the time limit at acceptable price while accepting legal and commercial terms. Then, issues in current procurement process were explored. Current procurement process is complex because of the involvement of large number of transactions. Further, transaction systems are centralized and a third party is monitoring instead of parties who are involved. Facility managers have found that existing systems have inefficient and time-consuming research interfaces, lack of unified interfaces, and it is unable to process large amount of data. Under the Objective 2, blockchain technology adoption for procurement process is explored. Distributed databases can integrate various stakeholders and can enable a reliable and uninterrupted procurement process. Revolution blockchain applications like smart contracts can automatically generate payments and transfer money or other assets when negotiations are fulfilled. Poor knowledge and poor understanding of this technology has affected blockchain-related innovations. Some of the identified barriers are related to infrastructure, organizational and behaviors. Further, resistance to adapt new technologies, integration with legal systems, adoption costs, and obtaining stakeholder support are some obstacles. Organizations are reluctant to invest their resources to develop blockchain technology-based applications. In order to overcome these barriers, organizations need to do careful planning and research. They need to review their policies and procedures and ensure that everyone clearly understands their roles and responsibilities. In achieving Objective 3, according to the responses provided by the experts, barriers in adopting blockchain for FM procurement process can be categorized into these 5 categories. They are socio-cultural, legal, economical, technical, and political and administrative barriers. This is the output of the data analysis of the expert survey. When we consider the socio-cultural barriers, people still haven't understand the strength of blockchain technology, so they resist for the change. Sri Lankan banks have a low trust on accepting cryptocurrencies. Lack of knowledge and competent people is another barrier. Further, suppliers are reluctant to feed data, thinking this as an overhead. Also, people are afraid of the transparency. As a solution, conducting awareness and training programs can be implemented. Further, it is essential to identify whether suppliers are ready to feed the procurement-related data. It is important to identify whether contracts are legally binding and what is relevant law when using smart contracts between suppliers and FM organizations. Absence of laws and regulations is a barrier. Therefore, it is required to develop relevant laws and regulations before its implementation. Financial incapability is the main economical barrier. Organizations are reluctant to convert their current procurement systems to adapt to a new system. In order to reduce unnecessary cost, existing systems should be analyzed and it is required to identify what type of requirements should be addressed. A complete analysis is required to decide whether to go for a conversion or a complete development. When we consider the technical barriers, mainly absence of a customized solution for this use case is an issue. Further, if it is used 100%, flexibility will be reduced. Integration of existing systems is difficult. When compared to database system, transactions run slowly. Further, without a strong internet connection, this is not successful. To overcome these barriers, it is essential to design system properly with proper integration, identify the most important requirements, utilize the available hardware. Further, write smart contracts with minimum level of customization is essential. Finally, when we consider political and administrative barriers, in Sri Lanka, there is less autonomy and less support for startups choosing for developing industries like FM. It is required to review organizational policies and procedures, utilize necessary resources, and develop new proposals regarding blockchain adoption. As a conclusion, in this study, key barriers were identified under 5 main categories as socio-cultural, legal, technical, financial, political, and administrative barriers. If the required attitude changes, financial capabilities, organizational contributions, legal background, and technical knowledge and strength available in Sri Lankan context, FM procurement process can be further developed with blockchain adoption. FM and IT industries can work together to achieve a significant output. These are some references used. These are also some references used. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation and have a good day.
And thank you very much, Hasni. I think we've made you also a presenter, and I already see that John has provided a comment here, which is it's very good to put these barriers and solutions. But what's the next step? Where would you start and why?
Actually, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? So actually, in my research, first I had done another research, and I have identified the available issues in the facilities management industry. There I have identified with the increase of complexities and with the transparency issues, we need to transform the current situation in the FM procurement system, and also transparency also an issue, and integration of parties involved, time delays. So for that one, a proper system should be developed. As a solution, blockchain was, I have studied about how to apply it for the good development. As a solution, blockchain was capable for this procurement process. And from that, after that study, I identified these barriers. So when we consider barriers, there are many barriers, but mainly social. I think the social culture barrier is the first step we have to involve in, because people are reluctant to transform and they have different ideas, so they don't like change. Make them known that we should change because there's new technology. So we have the capability to transform. So I think we should start in that area.
Okay. So what is the first step to try to make this social cultural change? How would you persuade people that they should change?
Actually, if we consider the organizations, we can make awareness of people with, including IT industry. We have to include IT industry, and we can have new proposals. First, we have to develop new proposals like this. and we have to show them we can change. So accordingly, we have to identify what we have to do, and then I think we can change, and we have to make the management also known about these changes, and if they like to change, we can go for these kind of innovative technologies, I think.
Okay, so I was very struck by your method because having read your paper, I see that, and also you presented just now in one slide the people that you were talking to, and it struck me that a lot of them tend to be on this kind of software side and on the kind of IT side. And I was just wondering if you also spoke to people from the kind of procurement side, because actually, you're trying to use this for procuring facilities management services. And I just wondered that whether you also interviewed these people, and maybe a follow-up point there is that, do you see that also in our research methods, that you are also potentially an initiator of change because you already start to create that awareness just by interviewing people? What do you think?
You mean about a supply organization, if you consider. So if you can supply organization, I have interviewed them as well. So in this area, I identify that some are not reluctant to change their current situation, but with the current problems like complexities and transparency issues and time delays and those, as I said, daily integration of parties, they wanted to go for a change. They like to have a good connection with the FM organization and suppliers, and like developing smart contracts and go for a good development. So some like to change, but some are reluctant to go for this kind of changes.
Okay. I see John has a follow-up question, and maybe John, can we maybe hear from you again? So maybe you could use your microphone and camera, because it's always nice to see the face. And you've disappeared a bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can see me also. Yeah.
And we can see.
I just had a follow-up question. Maybe I'm a bit rough with you here, but I mean, you're addressing a huge target in terms of groups and so on. So I was just wondering, have you thought anything about if you need different strategies to implement, depending on who you address?
Yeah, mainly if you consider facilities management, for the procurement, there are two parties, mainly FM organizations and the suppliers. So it's better to have different strategies for both of them because they are different parties and they have different integration methods. So yeah, it's good to have different strategies for both of them separately.
And are you thinking about developing that further?
Yeah, I'm thinking of developing it further to identify some, like as you mentioned, different strategies for different areas. I think I can expand this research further with some improvements.
Yeah, interesting. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John, for asking these, I think, very useful questions rather than rough questions. I think they're very helpful. Can I maybe ask if Lynn is still in the room to maybe put the camera on as well? Because I think we have some time now also to have a joint conversation. Because I see with Hasni's interest in blockchain and also your interest in with ecosystem, that what we're seeing here is the sort of dynamics of decentralization, which I think is also quite, because I think you also mentioned in your paper, Lynn, that, you're moving away from a central control to actually trying to get to that shared value proposition. Before we launch to that conversation, can both of you also just clarify, are you doing this as part of a research project or a PhD? And if you are for a PhD, which stage are you at this moment? Hasni?
I'm currently doing a master's, and it's a different project. I have started a different project now on sustainability area.
Okay. Well, I'm sure blockchain will at some point have some application area. And Lynn?
Well, I recently started as a PhD at the University of Twente
Okay.
In the Netherlands. So I started in February. So
So you're both very new to the game, as they say. Okay, that's good. Any other thoughts on the kind of the presentations that we heard in this session?
Well, I was thinking about a question that I had in the beginning. It was a question on what was surprising, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was thinking about it afterwards, and I was thinking it is quite surprising, maybe, how these organizations in the construction sector tried to go beyond the traditional procurement practices.
Okay.
As we try to, normally also we always have like one-off collaborations for the single project level, and procurement regulations makes it quite difficult to have a longer-term relationship with the same contractor due to the public nature, of course, of the clients. So it is quite interesting and maybe also surprising how these organizations try to do have a longer term relationship with one or a few contractors to really be able to come further and develop things for the longer term together.
So they are not necessarily as conservative as we often read about, that they're always trying to push the boundaries a bit, in your view.
Well, I think not all. I think,
Not
of
all.
course, yeah.
And in your sense, because also it might help with Hasni's strategies to encourage blockchain, what types of stakeholders do you think are much more progressive when you come across them?
Well, I feel like, I mean, you are looking for like the contractor or the client or types like that?
Or maybe when you were doing your analysis, who did you think you felt was actually quite progressive? Because you have quite interesting governance arrangements with your shopping mall and your so
yeah, I think in that case it was the public clients
okay.
Who initiated this new way of collaboration with these parties, and they started with it also to respond on a vision document published by the Union of Water Boards, so the overarching organization, or like union for all water boards in the Netherlands, who also want to steer on more on like contact instead of contracts.
Okay.
So, that was, I think, one very progressive thing in the Dutch construction sector. But also they said that the way that they used to collaborate causes lots of troubles between the client and the contractor, and they just wanted to collaborate in a more nicer way, actually.
Okay. And on this note, you mentioned also that there's the public client, and there's a question for Hasni. What about the public perception about blockchain technologies? Did you manage to capture that in your study?
Public perception, currently, most of the people are not aware about the blockchain technology in Sri Lanka. Only the IT industry is known about that. So mainly as a researcher, I searched on blockchain on internet, and after that I did some studies by interviewing from some people from the IT industry. So normally people and some industries are not aware, but currently finance industry is aware. I have read that banks are ready to go for blockchain technology. So I think there will be new changes in the future, but there's little some we have to change. But currently there's a lack of knowledge on blockchain technology. But I think with time we can develop.
Yeah,
In the
and
future.
it's actually when people come together that we grow in that awareness and knowledge. We have 1 minute left, so I would like to summarize this session. We had three rather very different papers. But from my reading of the papers and the presentations, I think that there are some common themes there. So whether we're talking about the innovation ecosystem, whether we're talking about taxation on property or blockchain technologies, I think we had 3 papers that were looking at rather disruptive behaviors. And part of that disruption is also to distribute power, to distribute sort of equity. And I think also all 3 papers touch upon this idea of dependencies, or rather, more accurately, interdependencies. So interdependencies between stakeholders, interdependencies between the IT people in procurement, but also interdependencies across different cities and countries. Finally, I think maybe there's a final point to make. I think the 3 papers give us deepens our understanding of all these disruptive forces, but maybe in the future, we should also pay attention to the dynamics of change. So what can we do about it? And since both Lynn and Hasni are at the start of the research career, I'm looking forward to actually seeing what we can do about these things. Can I ask all of you to thank them in the usual fashion? You can either clap or use the reaction button to give them a thumbs up. Thank you, and now it is lunchtime.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.